All right. Hello, Professor. This is Alex Hain. This is my 10-minute final project for Python. And so I will be looking at the driver behind crude birth rates in different regions of the world. So just a quick recap. So if you remember in my last video, I explored population trends throughout different generations by looking at the crude birth rates and the crude death rates, across the world, all countries, over the years. And I chose four different years to represent four different generations. So I looked at baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. And if you'll remember, that data showed that over time, the rates for both birth and death rates had slowly been declining overall. And at the end of the project, if you remember, one potential driver that I noted that could have a correlation to the birth rates and death rates in each region of the world was poverty rates or income levels, whatever you want to call it. Because there was a glaring trend in the maps that I made that I noticed where um, different regions of the world experienced drastically different levels for both birth and death rates. With Africa, South Latin America, and or Southeast Asia really experiencing very high birth rates and also very high death rates as well. And on the contrary to that, the regions where we saw lower birth rates and lower death rates. It was Europe, North America, um, those areas. Um, and so in the last video, we looked at those maps and looked at all that stuff. And one suggestion you had for me for this project was to analyze a little deeper into income levels specifically of because I had noted that previously of why that might have an effect on those rates. So just a little introduction to this project. So I only focused on the 2013 data for this project, mainly because it's the most recent data that I had available using the World Data CSV large data file. And since it's the most recent, it's the most relevant to the world as it is today. And so I broke down, like I mentioned, I broke down the data this time by region rather than country, um, just because, like I said, it fits more into the trends that I kind of wanted to look at for this one. Um, and so the measure I used for this project was GDP per capita. Um, yeah, I just feel that's the best representation of what each kind of individual um, looks like in terms of their income level or their poverty level. And I thought that had good relationships towards birth rates and death rates because it is so individually focused. Um, and so, like I said, I'm looking to determine if there was a correlation between the GDP per capita and the birth rates and death rates. Specifically, is that if does a low GDP per capita correlate with a high birth rate, excuse me, and a high death rate, and vice versa? Does a high GDP per capita correlate with a low birth rate and low death rate? So the first thing I did, like the last video, I made a map. I just think this is the best tool for me, at least, to visualize everything. Um, when I can see things on a map like this visually, it just helps me better understand. And so if you'll take note of our scale in the top right, the darker the color, the higher the GDP per capita. And you'll notice there's actually a lot of lighter color in this map, which did kind of surprise me a little bit. Um, but once you narrow it down to the regions that excuse me, the lighter color is, South America, Latin America, Africa, Asia, those those regions that I had previously mentioned with the high birth rates and death rates from our last video. It made a little sense to me. North America and most of Europe, as you can see, are a little darker. So, and Australia, of course, too. So I ran a regression model um, to just take a look at all that and see what kind of correlations we had. Um, and so this is these are the results that were generated from the code. And I also made this dot graph um, to show the value of the GDP per capita on the y-axis, and then the year on the x-axis. And then I labeled each dot in the region that they represent. So as you can see, like we had hypothesized at the end of our last video and in the beginning of this video, is that North America and Europe had the highest GDP per capitas, um, and they also had the lower birth rates and death rates from our last video. And there's some smaller regions down here, not regions you might necessarily think of right away, but the data set did separate, Asia into East Asia, South Asia. Um, it separated Africa really into, North Africa and the Middle East, and then sub-Saharan Africa. So really the Southern African countries like Angola or Zimbabwe, etc. Um, and so again, this fits with what we had predicted in our last video as well as this video, is that those regions with lower GDP per capita, it will have the correlate to the higher birth rates and death rates as well. Yeah, so just to reiterate, conclusion. So that new data that we analyzed, looked at, ran our models on, proved that our hunch was correct, that the regions with low income levels would have the higher birth rates and the higher death rates. So that is all I have for this project. It was a great class. I enjoyed it. Everything was, it was mentally challenging, but in a good way. So just want to thank you for a great semester, and take care and stay in touch. Thanks.